Submitted then part of the questions. The member for Hunter.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well, as I told the National Press Club 2 days after the Treasurer delivered the budget, I was still unable to decide whether Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer, was the luckiest or unluckiest Treasurer in Australia's history. Unlucky, of course, because he's had to negotiate the challenge of a pandemic and all the economic consequences we've experienced as a result of it, Mr Deputy Speaker. But lucky, because he'd probably be the first Treasurer in history, although I'm not sure exactly what transpired during the First and Second World Wars, who's been able to rack up...
Order. Can I ask people that they either vacate the room or take their seats?
Rack up... they really should stay and listen to this, Mr Deputy Speaker. They might learn something from me.
Their seats
but he's certainly the first Treasurer since the Second World War who's been given an opportunity to rack up eye-watering debt and deficit with very little criticism from either the opposition parties, the business community, or indeed the community more generally, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I also said there, so let's hope that the debt he has raised on behalf of the Australian community is money well spent in our economy. Now, I also said on that occasion that it will be some time before we know the answer to that question, before we know whether the way the money was spent maximises economic stimulus, maximises job retention and creation, and of course maximises our opportunity to give a helping hand to those who are most adversely affected. I fear today that we might not have to wait as long as I thought we might. I think we can already see signs of cracks appearing in the budget strategy. Economic commentators everywhere talking about the economic inefficiency of the spend. You know, for example, I think it was Ross Gittins who said investment in social housing would have given more stimulus alongside a long-lasting impact on our infrastructure and indeed on some of our poorer communities. We can see that the precipitous withdrawal of JobKeeper is probably unwise. I suspect the government has left the opportunity open to address that. Let's hope it does, because it's very clear that the economy hasn't yet sunk to its lowest depths. Things will get worse and people will need ongoing assistance. I'm very disappointed, and it hasn't taken us long to conclude that the decision to allow only those 35 years of age and under to benefit from the so-called job maker scheme. It makes no sense to me, and we know, because commentators have reacted and responded to this constraint by analysing who have been most hurt, and the reality is those who have been most hurt are older Australians, but many of whom are still of working age, Mr Deputy Speaker. It makes no sense to target only those under 35 years of age, and I think it's an issue the government really needs to revisit and consider. Economic commentators and social commentators also expressed concern that the government hasn't adequately addressed the issues in aged care in all of our communities, and I doubt there's a member of this place that doesn't have issues in aged care in the community. We have wonderful aged care providers, Mr Deputy Speaker. The quality aged care providers still dominate the sector. Unfortunately, there are a few for-profit providers that haven't lived up to our expectations, but they can't perform, any of them, Mr Deputy Speaker, without the resourcing they need from government. You know, we all hark back, I'm old enough to hark back to the good old days when state governments ran nursing homes full of nurses, other health professionals, cleaning staff, all the people you need to make it a hygienic place, a professionally run place, and a place which can serve both the medical and social needs of residents. And it's a great black mark on our society that we've allowed those standards to decline over time in the name of fiscal constraint. And even more, a shame we didn't take this opportunity in this pandemic and this economic crisis to address that. A great shame, and I say to the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, it is not too late, Mr Deputy Speaker. This was my 25th budget. I'm reluctant to say that because it might suggest that I'm a little bit older than I look, Mr Deputy Speaker. And every budget, of course, is different. And every budget night I've sat through has been an interesting budget night, but basically, you know, a similar process, certainly a similar process, but similar outcomes in terms of their political environment. Of course, I was here for all of the John Howard era, and of course, John Howard benefited from the hard-won reforms of the Hawke and Keating governments, and save for a shaky period during the early part of their term, which was the Asian financial crisis. John Howard and Peter Costello had a pretty easy ride. The global economy was strong. They had rivers of income into the government coffers. They were able to deliver tax cuts, for example, as a consequence, and bank some money away for rainy days. So they had it pretty easy, Mr Deputy Speaker. The next budget delivered outside the bounds of normality, as I might describe it, was the 2009 budget, where a Labor government, of course, was dealing with all the consequences of the global financial crisis. So budgets, in my view, Mr Deputy Speaker, now more than ever, are not much of a statement of government policy. They are certainly a statement of government intention in terms of the revenue it intends to raise and the money it intends to spend, and they remain a very, very important document, and budget night remains an important occasion. And of course, both of those things send important signals to the market, and of course provide a level of transparency to the market and our communities collectively. But as hard as Prime Ministers and Treasurers, and indeed the media, try, budget nights aren't really the time when the government's political narrative for the year and the years ahead are set. Long gone are the days when the cigs up, beers up headline raised the day after the budget, in the days before the indexation of excise. All the big issues, Mr Deputy Speaker, now tend to happen outside the budget cycle, and of course the budget itself is preempted by enormous leaks ahead of the big occasion, and both the markets and the community know well in advance where the government is heading. So I'd like to talk about that political narrative, though, Mr Deputy Speaker, and the way in which it really happens outside the budget process. Although arguably the 2014 budget is an exception to the rule, because the aggressive fiscal brutality it marked was one which I think had a long-lasting impact, and probably was the beginning of the end, in my view, of the Abbott government. But the big three enduring divisive political disruptors in my more than 24 years, Mr Deputy Speaker, in my view, were one, the arrival of asylum seekers by boat, the former Labor government's climate change policies, and the Howard government's work choices legislation. Each of those had immediate but also enduring impacts. Of course, there were plenty of other big events and policies along the way, but none had the enduring and divisive impacts of the three I've identified. Work choices may be the less obvious of the three in terms of its enduring effect, but John Howard's overreach has been a lasting break on the anti-worker obsessions of the Liberal and National parties. The arrival of the MV Tampa in August 2001 was an invitation to the Howard government to harness and unleash a latent xenophobia in our communities, and in some pockets of our nation, a level of racism that left me shocked and disillusioned. I feel no ill will towards any citizen who left me feeling disappointed at that time or indeed in later times. But I do remain angry that an Australian government was prepared and willing in the earliest days of the 21st century, when we should be more enlightened, Mr Deputy Speaker, was so willing to deploy the politics of fear and work so hard to divide our communities for its own political gain. Tampa is not so enduring in and of itself, but the demons the government's response unleashed is, and they impact on the dynamic of this place still, every day. It gave a voice to a darker side of our society, and having worked more than once, and has worked more than once in political terms for the Liberal and National parties, the dog whistle is now embedded in the modus operandi of the coalition parties, and it manifests itself in a range of political and policy strategies till this day. The contemporary example, of course, is the Morrison government's approach to our relationship with China, our largest and most important trading partner, where it is putting its quest for domestic political advantage ahead of the national interest. But of the three big disruptors, climate change trumps them all. History will treat badly all those who have sought political advantage by exploiting the opportunity created by those who have taken seriously our responsibility to act on climate change. I count John Howard, by the way, Mr Deputy Speaker, amongst the political victims. His belated 2007 commitment to an emissions trading scheme was seen for what it was, Mr Deputy Speaker, a belated last-ditch effort to right the wrong, but the electorate saw through it. Tony Abbott made carbon scare the centrepiece of his 2013 election strategy. Successfully so, sadly. So successful was he that he was able to claim a mandate to repeal the Gillard government's Clean Energy Act of 2011. Mr Deputy Speaker, I think that was one of the most irresponsible acts I've seen in this parliament. I think Tony Abbott could have been much better than that. If the Gillard government's architecture had still been in place, the carbon price would be very low. Our economy would be operating at the same strength or otherwise as it would have been without it. Our jobs situation would be the same, but our carbon emissions would be lower. And like the GST, no one would even know it was there, Mr Deputy Speaker. John Howard introduced the mandatory renewable energy target probably more now than 2 decades ago. It was, if you like, our first carbon tax. Modest, but our first constraint on carbon in the market. 2 decades on, we are still without a carbon mechanism, a market mechanism designed to put downward pressure on greenhouse gas emissions. And we should reflect on that, Mr Deputy Speaker. 2 decades on, from when John Howard first put a market-based mechanism in place, we are still without one, and our carbon growth is basically flatlining. In other words, going nowhere near meeting the obligations we gave ourselves when Malcolm Turnbull signed the Paris Agreement. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the current Prime Minister thinks he can fulfil our commitments to Paris without a market-based mechanism. He certainly hasn't always thought that, because they certainly had a few goes, 3 goes, in fact, the clean energy target and so on in recent years. But he now says he can make it. Well, I hope he can, Mr Deputy Speaker. I hope he can. Like the budget, it won't be the most economically efficient way of getting there, but if he can get there, that would be a good thing. My problem is he's not on path to getting there, Mr Deputy Speaker. We need in this place to put the politics of carbon and climate change behind us and work together to do our bit, to meet up to our responsibility and the commitments we made at Paris, to do our bit as a small player, to make our contribution to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions around the world. We need to do it, of course, in a responsible and sensible way, but we'll only do it successfully if we put the politics behind us, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we do it together, work together, and to deliver what both the local community and the international community expects of us.
I thank the member for Hunter. The question now is that the